I'm Brooks Barrett, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ. I am joined by my co-host, the Reverend Michael Malcolm, who is the Executive Director for the People's Justice Council in Alabama, Interfaith Power and Light. Michael, I recently came across a quote from an ancient Greek philosopher who once said that circumstances don't make the person, they reveal who the person is. And what if we adapted that to the circumstances today and what they reveal about our faith? What is being revealed about our faith today? What are the circumstances of today revealing about how we understand Jesus in relationship to the Roman Empire? What is it revealing about how we understand ourselves and our faith in relationship to the authoritarian governments of today? Once we have come to terms with those questions, perhaps the more important question is, what is being revealed about how our faith compels us to act today? Michael, what are your thoughts in framing our conversation about faith-rooted anti-authoritarianism?
Yeah, Brooks, it actually goes even beyond that and representation and how we represent God in society. While attending my alma mater, the Interdenominational Theological Center, I learned more in depth about God being with us, the Emmanuel. I learned that this was a radical positional statement, saying that God is with us gives God relevance. Today, the people are asking, where is God? We are left with a challenge. Where are we positioning God? Is God on the side of the people, or is God on the side of the corporate interests, the authoritarianism, and the corruption? This week, the head of the administration said that affordability is a democratic hoax. Will you make God relevant for those that need God the most? Our land is polluted. Our lungs are polluted. Our lives are polluted. Will you stand to show that God is with us? Brooks, I am grateful for this conversation in this season, and I look forward to gleaming the nuggets of wisdom that'll come from our guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That's a theme that works well as we think about this Advent season. God is with us, and how is that being revealed in our lives today? Let me introduce you to our speakers in the order in which they'll be speaking today. First up, we'll have Dr. Maria Stephan, who is the co-lead and chief organizer at the Horizons Project, an organizing initiative focused on bringing people together across differences to dismantle tyranny and build an inclusive democracy in the United States. Stephan is the co-author with Erica Chenoweth of Why Civil Resistance Works, the Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict, which was awarded the 2012 Woodrow Wilson Foundation Prize by the American Political Science Association for the best book published in political science. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, and Foreign Affairs, among other outlets. We're joined as well by Brother Rodrigo Peret, who is a Brazilian Franciscan friar and a civil engineer engaged in justice, peace, and ecological advocacy. He has served as an advisor to the Catholic Brazilian Bishops' Conference Special Commission on Integral Ecology and Mining. He has 41 years of experience mediating land and mining conflicts through the Pastoral Land Commission. And finally, today we have with us the Reverend Jorge Bautista, who is a seasoned pastor, educator, and community leader with over 20 years of experience advancing social justice, equity, and inclusion. He holds a Master's of Divinity from the Pacific School of Religion and a BA from North Park University. Deeply committed to nurturing diverse communities, Jorge has led transformative ministry initiatives, from launching an LGBTQ plus affirming Spanish language service to advocating for affordable housing and fostering meaningful community engagement. We are so grateful to have each of you with us today and all of the knowledge and wisdom that you bring to the table. Maria, if you could get us started.
All right. Thank you so much, Reverend Brooks. It's really a pleasure to be with you all today. And first, I just want to offer a thank you to the United Church of Christ. I really appreciate how outspoken and organized your church has been in opposing authoritarian practices in this country, in rejecting publicly, vehemently the false idolatry of Christian nationalism, and in standing in solidarity with the vulnerable and those who are under attack. So thank you for all that you are doing. So I was asked to talk a little bit about our current moment of resurgent and rising authoritarianism in the US and how to think about powerful responses and the role of faith communities in challenging autocracy. So I first just want to start off by offering, so many examples of courage and faith and action in this moment that certainly keeps me hopeful. Everything from faith's participation in vigils and protests and consumer boycotts and symbolic actions and organized non-cooperation with enablers of authoritarianism and repression. So such a full range of things happening across the country in cities that are occupied or facing intense ICE raids in this moment. So just so much courage and faithful action on display in this moment that I take great hope from. And yes, we are, next slide, Alicia, we are in a moment of, authoritarian resurgence in this country. Authoritarianism did not just begin with this administration. Of course, we have a long history of authoritarianism in this country, grounded in misogyny, racism, white supremacy, unbridled capitalism. And just to say as well, we are facing a global phenomenon of rising authoritarianism with about 20 years, consecutive years of rising autocracy, often undergirded by religious nationalism around the world. What we can say in the US is that we're facing a pretty unprecedented speed of kind of dismantling of kind of democratic freedoms, norms, and institutions. And we have a far-right authoritarian movement that is allied with a religious nationalist movement that has taken over all three branches of government and is seeking to systematically undermine checks on power, use the power of the state to punish opposition and dissent, and to remain in power indefinitely. And so the thing about autocrats, whether, they are, autocratic regimes and leaders in places like Hungary or Brazil or El Salvador or Turkey or Russia, they all roughly follow the same playbook. And it's all grounded in fear and fear-based divide and rule. And what do? And, you all could put in the chat examples of each of these. They weaponize state agencies like the Departments of Justice to direct investigations against critics, whether it's the James Comey or Letitia James or, a range of different opponents and critics. They give license to lawbreaking. They condone, they pardon those responsible for the January 6th insurrection to white-collar criminals, and they crack down on others and kind of unleash the power of, federal law enforcement against opponents. They use regulatory retaliation. They use licensing, the Federal Communications Commission, to put pressure on media outlets to, for example, remove the Jimmy Kimmel Live show. They use regulatory retaliation against universities, law firms, other institutions to kind of bring them into line. And of course, we know that they deploy the military domestically as a show of force, as a flex, and to normalize the presence of the military in the streets. And we've seen this in cities across the country from, Memphis, LA, DC, Chicago, that this is part of the toolkit of enforcing authoritarian power. And, they use law enforcement as a vector of terror, essentially, and to promote fear and to try to get people to keep their heads down and to comply. And right now, ICE and the alphabet soup of law enforcement agencies is a primary vector of of fear-based terrorism in our communities. And then, autocrats, once in power, they attempt to remain in power. And we have a precedent in this country of January 6th. We have, already the seeds are sown to undermine elections that the president doesn't win. So, so these are kind of all the elements of the authoritarian playbook that we're experiencing day in and day out in this country and in other countries around the world. You all know better than anyone how religious nationalism is being used to underpin authoritarianism in this country and around the world. Autocrats, especially on the far right, use religious frames, symbols, messages to mobilize their bases to scapegoat opponents, all to consolidate power, relying on traditional values, again, to kind of scapegoat, to otherize people. So this is kind of, and my good friend and UCC minister, Reverend Susie Hayward, together with Dr. Matthew Taylor, have been running a terrific webinar series, podcast series called American Unexceptionalism that looks at the relationship between religious nationalism, authoritarianism, and how people have combated it in countries around the world. So definitely check out that podcast. Next slide, Alicia. And so, again, what keeps me grounded and hopeful in this moment is that peoples around the world, in this country and around the world, have confronted authoritarian regimes. They have resisted and they have prevailed. So some years ago, I joined forces with Erica Chenoweth and other political scientists, and we looked at hundreds of campaigns around the world where people faced autocratic regimes, whether it was in Chile under Pinochet or in South Africa under the apartheid regime or in Poland against the communist dictatorship. Or in our country, the racial authoritarian regimes regime in the Jim Crow South. And we studied what made these movements successful. And, first of all, not only were the nonviolent resistance movements, so those movements that relied on protest, boycott, strike, civil disobedience, non-cooperation, range of nonviolent tactics, not only were these campaigns twice as effective as armed insurgencies in challenging autocratic regimes, they also tended to pave the way to more democratic countries. Those that were successful were able to build and sustain large and diverse participation. They were able to bring people together across various sectoral, geographic, racial, ethnic divides and maintain that participation. Bring people together, workers, faith leaders, veterans, military families. So big tents and broad fronts were really key. And one statistical finding that Erica found subsequent to writing the book was that, based on the data underpinning the research for why civil resistance works, that no regime has remained in power when 3.5% of the population has engaged in active protest. So that's about 11 million Americans. And of course, what matters is sustaining it, organizing, building campaigns and leadership. We found that campaigns that were able to diversify their tactics, so they were able to use things like marches, rallies, and demonstrations, but also expand to tactics of non-cooperation, strikes, boycotts, walkouts that are very difficult to repress. These were key to shifting power and applying pressure on autocratic regimes. And those campaigns that were able to bring about loyalty shifts and defections in key pillars. So these are the organizations and institutions like corporate actors, like faith organizations, unions, professional associations, police, security forces. So when you start to see shifts within these pillars, that is a sign that the pro-democracy movement is gaining power. And then, pro-democracy movements often face violent repression. It is the norm, sadly. Movements that were able to organize, prepare, train, plan, and maintain resilience were able to withstand the onslaught of repression coming from regimes. And then, thinking about the role of faith. So we know that faith organizations and institutions globally have not only enabled autocracy and fascism, they have also been in the leading driving force of movements for rights, freedom, democracy around the world. And, thinking about all the different roles that faith actors play. And I should say, some research by my old colleagues at the U.S. Institute of Peace found that in over the majority of major nonviolent campaigns globally targeting authoritarian regimes involved faith as a leading player. So they have been present in the vast majority of these movements around the world, and they have all these superpowers: the moral protest and persuasion, the organizing and training, the ability to organize and provide resources, mutual aid, sanctuary to mitigate repression, the leveraging of symbolic and spiritual power, like including rituals, the bridge building, bringing together diverse constituencies and congregations, and of course, the organized collective stubbornness or non-cooperation that has been so key to the success of movements. And just a few examples of some of these superpowers in terms of like prophetic voice. I'm thinking here about the role of, the Barmen Declaration, which was developed by German faith leaders, which rejected, this was a 1934 declaration that rejected the Nazi attempt to control Christianity and called on German churches to resist the idolatry and political coercion of the Third Reich. And of course, a letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. King's 1963 letter calling on the need to protest unjust laws through nonviolent direct action and chastising the moral failure, notably of white moderates, of preferring order over justice. And then the powerful Kairos document, the 1985 declaration by South African theologians that condemned apartheid as heresy, rejected state theology, and called churches to prophetic resistance to unjust and violent political systems. Next slide. And of course, like all the role of the organizing, I'm thinking about the Philippines, the people power movement under Marcos, where every Catholic leadership from Jamie Sin on down were preparing the population in nonviolent resistance, organizing trainings in church basements. Of course, the Montgomery bus boycott, one of the most powerful civil resistance campaigns in the history of the world, that involved a combination of sustained non-cooperation to desegregate the buses, preparation, training, planning. East Germany, the churches, the role that they played in challenging communist autocracy in the 1980s. And then Nicaragua, thinking about the role of churches in providing sanctuary and support for the students who rose up against the Ortega regime and challenged the abuses of power, marched in solidarity, and provided safe spaces for the protesters. And then can't remember the one on the right, Alicia. What is the one on the right?
It is the Vicariate of Solidarity and
Yes,
those
the
trials
Vicariate of
that they continue
Solidarity
to
in
have.
Chile. Chile. So all the role played by the Vicariate in providing, mutual aid, legal assistance, truth and reconciliation support, and one of the few autonomous spaces for organizing in Chile under the Pinochet regime. And Hong Kong, thinking about the role of symbols, like protesters would show up singing hallelujah to the Lord and beseeching the security forces in Hong Kong to repent in the face of violence and abuses. South Korea, when the president declared martial law at the end of last year, you had people of faith showing up en masse to protest, unions, people of faith, who then shaved their heads as a sign of defiance with the against the military, the attempt to impose military and martial law, which they reversed. And then one of the very best examples of bridging and organizing in Zambia, when then president attempted to manipulate the constitution and run for a third term in office, you had the national church bodies for Protestants, Catholics, evangelicals come together to denounce the abuse of power. And when protests were banned, these group bodies came together to organize pray-ins around the church, so creative nonviolent action. In Burma, during the Saffron Revolution, the monks, as a sign of non-cooperation, overturned their alms bowls to designate defiance with the military regime. So all these powerful creative forms of nonviolent action. And we can think about the different roles that faith actors can play in terms of blocking. All the blocking of harms that are happening, abuses of power through organizing, being with communities, supporting community resilience, the bridging, bringing people together across difference in ecumenical ways, interfaith ways, cross-pillar ways, so important. And then building. We can't just resist what we're against. We need to articulate the vision and build towards what we are for. So again, powerful roles for faith leaders in all these areas. And just finally, one of the sources of inspiration for me and doing research around the world on nonviolent resistance has been this powerful documentary film, A Force More Powerful, which folks can access. And it tells the stories of how populations resisted dictatorship in Chile under Pinochet, in Poland, the Solidarity Movement, in South Africa, the anti-apartheid struggle, in Nashville, the lunch counter sit-ins, in the Danish resistance to the Nazis. So maybe this can serve as a source of inspiration in our current moment. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Dr. Brooks.
Thank you so much for that inspiring presentation. We're grateful. We'll have time later for questions. We turn it now to Brother Rodrigo.
Thank you. I will try to make a short reflection that comes from the grounds, from the experience we are involved in an ecumenical perspective, also in the perspective of anti-authoritarianism and environmental justice. And I start with a simple truth. Take into consideration that Christian churches in many places are being captured by this authoritarianism perspective, especially when you talk about the growth of the far right and its imposing in terms of the climate crisis and the new authoritarianism that comes from the so-called transitions. Green transition, energy, digital, and military transition, the so-called false solutions that came out to take into consideration and try to solve the issue of the climate crisis. I think first one is a simple truth. God's creation is sacred, and any assault against the earth is also assault against God, who breathed life into it. As Pope Francis teaches us we live in a common home, and a phrase with deep theological meaning, this common home, and it echoes Genesis with creation, is pronounced very good and entrusted to humanity, not for domination, but for care and communion. And the concept that I think we need to work a lot is in integral ecology. The creation is a web of relation held together by God's sustaining love. Mountains, forests, rivers, human beings, insects, all share common dignity because they share common creator. The earth is the Lord and all that is in it. Therefore, ecological destruction is not simply a technical mistake, it's a rupture in our relation with one another and with the planet. We are living in a profound spiritual crisis. The violence we see against nature, indigenous peoples, environmental defenders, it's outward expression of a deep disorder, a worldview that treats creations as a property, communities as an obstacle, and life as expendable. Last year alone, at least 146 environmental defenders were killed or disappeared around the world. In the last decade, more than 2,253 deaths have been recorded. These women and men, many of them indigenous, many of them people of faith, died precisely because they believed that creation was not for sale. In the Christian tradition, martyrdom is the ultimate witness. These defenders are modern martyrs of creation. I think they echoes the words of Jesus, greater love has no one than this, to lay down on one's life for one's friend. They lay down their lives for future generations. So the violence surrounding mining, agribusiness, and other extractive industries is not random. It stems from what Scripture call spirit of empire. We could say the colonial spirit that still survived, patriarchal spirit that still survived, the same spirit embodied in Exodus, or maybe for the Gospels when they talk about Herodes, the Roman Empire in the early church. So always carries some same characteristics: concentration of wealth and power, suppression of dissent, disregard for the poor, violence against creation. So this is why ecological destruction so often travels within authoritarianism. Extractive economies requires silence, submission, and the erasure of local voices. As we see in Brazil, as you see in Africa, the experiences we had in Zimbabwe and other countries, and many places, communities are displaced, activists are criminalized, and democratic institutions are weakened. This is not merely political. I would say that we could consider this as a spiritual warfare between the God of life and idols of greed. Mining in many places, and is proposed now as a solution when we talk about critical minerals and rare earths for the so-called green energy and the data centers from the digital transition and the military transition, the new weapons, represent the sharpest expression of this logic. The earth is torn open for profit, rivers are poisoned, and traditional ways of life are destroyed. In the scripture, the land is not simply a resource. It's a living covenant partner. Leviticus says, the land is mine. With me, you are but tenants and sojourners. So this is a radical challenge to any system that treats land as commodity. In Brazil, communities resisting mining are creating, in other places in Latin America, territories free from mining, which can be understood theologically as a space of Sabbath, places where the land is allowed to rest, where other activities are able to be improved, where life is protected, and where human beings rediscover their vocation as caretakers instead of conquerors. So they insist on, first of all, challenging the unjust control of Earth's common goods. And when we talk about common goods, we're not talking only about common goods for us humans, but common goods for the nature itself. Defending biodiversity and the poor, practicing solidarity and autonomy, demanding just transition, reparations, and accountability, and defending the right to say no. This is not simply activism. It's discipleship, a continuation of Christ's mission to bring good news to the poor, freedom to the oppressed, and healing to creation. I think we could go to many different examples regarding to mine. Some regions have faced displacement, pollution, and political repression around extractive projects. Yet, in these places, Christians gather to pray, to organize, to struggle, to declare the creation itself is crying out, as Paul writes in Romans 8, a groaning for liberation. When communities resist authoritarian control over land and resources, they are participating in what the liberation theology calls the liberating action of God in history. Wherever Christians defend the poor and the earth, the kingdom becomes visible. So the struggles for environmental justice reveal profound theological truths. I would say some. God calls for vigilance, permanent democratic vigilance. Authoritarianism cannot be accepted as normal political option. It's opposed to life because it denies human dignity and violates creation. Defending democracy institution, we could say from a religious perspective, is a form of Christian stewardship. Truth as a spiritual tool, which means confronting disinformation, fake news, disinformation and manipulation. The tools of the authoritarian movements, the authoritarian politicians are forms of false prophecy. In a more religious perspective, Christians' witness requires truth-telling, even when costly. Another issue is we are called to build broad communities of life, building broad fronts of resistance, build coalitions among fishermen, tax collectors, women, foreigners, and poor like Jesus did. Today, environmental justice demands broad alliances, churches, indigenous peoples, scientists, unions, movements, and all who care for creation. Another one is conversion. ecological conversion begins at the grassroots. Build broader fronts of resistance. All authentic transformation begins in communities, in parishes, based ecclesial communities, youth groups, and social movements. It begins with listening to the cry of the poor, to the cry of the earth. Another one is resist what we could call from a religious perspective, the idols of our time, addressing structural causes of all this. Today the idols are not golden calves. They are limitless consumption, corporate greed, and false promise of development that sacrifices the most vulnerable. So the church must name those idols clearly and recognize the signs of the times, recognize early warning signs. To warn, Jesus was to warn his disciples to read the signs of the time. Today, those signs include attacks on journalists, attacks on LGBTQI+, persecution of activists, the capture of public institutions by private interests. Silence in such moments becomes complicity. To defend creation is to defend the image of God reflected in every creature. It's profoundly dip on our face, offering the world back to God with gratitude. So community organization, democratic vigilance, education, information, solidarity across borders. And I would say, let us remember, authoritarianism is not defeated in a single election, and ecological justice is not achieved by one policy. This is a long struggle of pilgrimage, of strength, of determination, of faith. But we walk with the assurance of Jesus Christ is with us to the end of the age. So I think there's some good news that we need to spread. Wherever people defend life, God is present. Wherever communities protect water and forest, the Spirit is at work. Wherever the poor stand for their dignity, Christ is risen in the struggle. So defending our common home and resisting authoritarianism are not optional. They are the heart of the gospel. They are the heart of a healthy society. To stand with the poor, to protect creation, to confront lies with truth, and build communities of life. This is what I think means our commitment in terms of confronting authoritarianism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Rodrigo, and thank you for pointing us to the heart of the gospel. We turn now to our final speaker, Reverend Jorge Bautista.
All right. It's good to be here with everyone. I like to approach this more like a conversation, so I'm just gonna respond to some of the things I've heard, and I want to thank Maria just for breaking everything down. I know, to me, that's kind of what plays a big part in my faith formation is knowing all the variety of histories and all the movements and everyone that has come before me and showing up and all the different creative ways to fight against different forms of authoritarianism and dictatorship. And that's always for me, I think the essence of, again, of everything I do is learning from those leaders and communities and even those that we don't hear from, right, who are kind of doing the work behind the scenes. So I'm just going to share a little bit of why, on a personal level, kind of what inspires me, what moves me to be on the front lines and to show up. And because yes, protest and organizing to me is and boycotting everything that Maria really laid out so well for us is it works. It does work. And that what brings me hope in my context today as we fight against the variety of federal agents threatening and terrorizing our communities today by kidnapping and doing whatever they're doing out there, even as we don't get to hear what happens with migrants who are being detained in certain prisons. Um, and then, when Brother Rodrigo made me think about also just Matthew chapter 2, verses 3, right? I mean, Jesus, it says, when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. So even the moment when Jesus was born, we know right away Jesus was born under occupation, right? We knew that at that moment, King Herod was so threatened by his very existence that he began to send out people to go look for him, to hurt him. And when that didn't follow through, we know King Herod, what did he sent soldiers out on the streets, which is a very familiar story we're seeing today, right? As a Chicano, and it's something I've grown up with, right? Sometimes many of us or people of color, we feel our very existence in itself is a threat to this government, right? We know fascism has existed in America. It has never really stopped. It just has been shaped in so many different ways. And so, as a Christian, I always feel it's my responsibility to also push back against Christian nationalism, because we know that religious authority in our history, even during Jesus' time, has been a force in how they kind of work with the empire to hurt people, to displace people, to marginalize people, to oppress people. And so, unfortunately, that's timeless. And so, two things, right? As a Christians, to face governments that hurt people, and to face religious organizations and groups that are also aligning themselves with those governments that are hurting people. And I know that for myself, one of the things that, as a Christian, uh, that continues to guide me in this difficult pursuit of equity really is the profound faith in the possibility of a just world, and the unconditional love for my communities and other communities that are being hurt. The principles of love and justice really is very, I mean, I don't want to say easy, but it's really what guides my work and how I show up to places. And what I want to offer is, sometimes many of us are not part of those communities, because I did grow up with migrant parents, migrant tias and tios. And so, this issue of migration and anti-migrants has been with me since I was born. I mean, I've had a Theo and Thea being deported when I was a little kid, and I mean, so it's nothing new at the same time, right? And so that love for my people is what puts me always on the front lines. And so, how do we put ourselves in those spaces to create that love for one another, right? Because, I know that when we develop deep relationships with people, and we become friends, and we become community, we will do anything for each other. And so, if you are out there wondering, well, how do I get involved? How do I show up? How do I, maybe you don't know the story. I always like to feel, immerse yourself in those communities, right? But immerse yourself not in the sense of like to be there to give suggestions, but like to just sit and see what others are saying. How are they leading, and how can you follow as well? And it's one of my favorite things to do for myself, is immersing myself in a variety of communities, that are not necessarily from my context, but showing up. And I feel like that's something Jesus did so well for us. He showed up and was present with a variety of different cultures and spiritualities, and he listened, and he never imposed and wanted to change how people are, but wanted to remind people that there's a unconditional love for everyone, right? But yeah, I think that at the end of the day, for me, we know that we are living in a time where it feels like there's more monsters than ever before, because monsters have always been around. And so, as a follower of Jesus, and I feel like Jesus showed this so much, that while there are monsters, this is also the time of resistant fighters to be born. This is a time for us as religious people to see, what it means for us to get radicalized a little bit more as well, right? In a sense, we could see ourselves as midwives, kind of, you know, kind of guiding new life, new world during this time. And that's what brings me hope. I'm seeing a lot of people trying to, figure that out for themselves. And so I see myself, and that what puts helps me put myself out there in the front line and not be scared of these monsters that are out there hurting us. Because at the end of the day, I know that what we're doing by putting ourselves out there is bringing in a new world, being that midwife to make sure that this new life is being taken care of.
Thank you for those words, Jorge, and the way of framing it as being a midwife to bringing in a new world. That's a nice way for us to conclude this part of the panel discussion as we now move to Q&A. Michael, would you like to start us off with a question and invite the audience to type in your questions in the Q&A function through Zoom? Michael, get
Yeah,
us started.
I guess I can ask this question, and thank you all for your contributions thus far. When it comes down to combating authoritarianism as a congregation of faith, if you will, as communities of faith, what are some practical examples that you can give for how we combat this authoritarianism that we're experiencing today? Check. And I guess I'll ask that to whomever feels froggy.
I can kick us off if that's okay. Well, there are so many practical ways to become involved, and that faith communities already are involved. I think some of it is, as Reverend Jorge was talking about, getting involved in local community organizations and activities, whether that's immigration justice. So there's so much work in different places around the country focused on, protecting communities, providing mutual aid, providing support. So that whole getting plugged into kind of, immigration protection, mutual aid, solidarity networks locally and in communities is so critically important. I think like practically showing up as people of faith in processions, demonstrations, vigils. There's a power when people show up, as people and speaking as people of faith. And it's certainly clerics in their garbs, but it's just ordinary, people of faith as well. And showing up and, saying is it Reverend Barber who says they are only kings if we bow before them. So just bringing in some of the religious, framing and scripture in some of the vigils, protests, and demonstrations, participating in non-cooperation. So I'm thinking about some of the most powerful, boycotts that we've seen targeting enablers of authoritarianism. So everything from the Target boycott over that company's anti-DEI and kind of racist policies that was not just boycotting Target, it was boycotting. So it was investing in Black-owned businesses and banks and beyond. And I had the slide of the No Amazon for Advent campaign targeting Amazon over its contribution to surveillance technology and beyond. So ways to get involved with your purses and with your buying power. So those are a few practical ways, but supporting communities, protecting institutions, engaging in disruption, building community resilience, all things that people have.
Right.
She
Maria, I
was
think
she was just getting
yeah.
into the thunder too, Brooks.
Yeah, I just want to continue with what you're saying. I mean, to me, that's the essence is you don't have to have the answers. If you're just feeling that love and fire, this is wrong, but it seems abstract to you, maybe, just showing up and being a presence and being consistent with yourself and trusting these groups because there's a lot of wonderful people. Yes, they're not on mainstream media, they're doing behind the scenes work, but with amazing, amazing imagination to what could be different, right? and trusting the process, right? Eventually, once you become so immersed, you will eventually realize and have your own imaginations to be triggered. What can we do to fight and push back against fascism?
I think I think that there's not much to say after after all this, but I would say I would just remind that one of the targets of authoritarianism is to suppress participation, and I think one of the tools in Latin America, especially those who are more involved in liberation theology, etc., we used to say, especially during the military regime, the church wants to be the voice of the voiceless. I think nowadays it doesn't work anymore. Or we talk together with them, or we let them in open space for them to talk. I think this is to give the word, to share the word, to talk with. And the other aspect, I don't know if you realize how big the lobbies from mining company, fossil fuels, etc., with the Vatican, with other churches, not only Catholic churches. I follow some with the Church of London, Methodist Church, and the Catholic Church, especially when those big CEOs in the companies talk about dialogue. And I don't know if you have experimented to say we are against this dialogue. It's like a sin in a religious Christian environment to say we're not for dialogue. But dialogue is based on a symmetry. And this is what doesn't happen. And second, who do we represent? To represent someone, those who are represented needs to know. And they need to give us, it doesn't mean we don't have authority and ethical justification to say something, but we don't represent anyone. And now we're facing a very problematic issue. Just finished COP30, and then we saw how weak it's the official multilateralism system that we're living in. And it's a target. They want to destroy this multilateralism. But at the same time, we need to criticize this and talk about there is another multilateralism. This needs to be conserved somehow. It's a space. But we need to start talking about multilateralism that come from bottom to top. So this is so we're in a very tricky moment, but that's why we need to talk with and sometimes open the space and say, because we're not neutral, we have a side.
Thank you for those responses. Let me move to a question we have in our Q&A function. Here are the questions. How can we do better as individuals, congregations, and denominations to fight against religious/Christian nationalism? Do we need to strengthen campaigns against religious nationalism as such explicitly? Or is it better just to concentrate on emphasizing our different visions of religion in our work? I would like to tackle that one first.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I always tend to think evangelicals or those in the right way, they do such a good job in somehow marketing their message and getting it out there. Sometimes I feel like they're winning the narrative, right? And I always been asking myself this question, how can I get my narrative, my message that kind of contradicts or that says that pushes back because they are very involved and seems to have access to a variety of outlets that really gets their message. And we're seeing it because of politicians, right? Politicians also use their platforms to push their Christian nationalism ideas. And I'm coming here like I don't have the answer, but it's something that I think we need to constantly work on to get our narrative out more, even if it's how do we push our politicians to get their narrative out there and be more religious about why we stand on the side of whatever it is we're fighting for, right? But it does feel like they are just having that control more than many of us who are saying otherwise.
Yeah.
So good question.
Yeah, I think this is a good question. And I was thinking from my perspective here in Brazil, more with Catholic Church, etc. There's a phenomenon happening now. We are outsourcing the possibilities. There's so many parishes that repeats or get the influence from the influencers and from the different groups that exist. We don't really work anymore. We don't really go to the roots and try to build. There are going to be differences. Diversity is beautiful. So I think this is one thing that we need to be very aware. The other one is this move from the theology of prosperity to the theology of dominion. And this is, for me, this is the most dangerous thing. The prosperity was already a problem in terms of the values of this. The values changed, and even the relation with God and the relation with the sacred, etc. But now, when we and some groups thinks that we are the ones who are going to bring the solution, and I think we could think a lot about how the pillars of the dominion: religion, of course, family, education, government, media, arts, entertainment, and business. So the proponents believe this is an effort that it's our cause, so to impose. And of course, politicians who think they were elected with a mission. And this is another problem. So this move is dangerous because this is go to Christian fundamentalism that is terrible.
Thank you for those responses, Michael.
One last thing quickly.
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
that's why right now, I think optics is everything. And that's why, to kind of the point of us faith leaders to show up out there where the cameras are at, I mean, all those things do matter. So that's why more faith leaders, the more we could show up and the more we could be present. Not saying you have to be in the front lines, but just, being, an extra human being out there saying we stand on the side of love. All those images do get out, and the numbers and the resistance start to bubble up more. So show up. Yeah.
I guess I'm wrestling with knowing that we need to show up, and knowing that I do have some clergy, such as those who are on this call, as well as those who have joined me out in the streets on the front lines to do demonstrations, this, that, and the other. However, I also understand historically that the church has led when it came down to injustices, whether it be social, environmental, or whatever the injustice might be. How do we build this groundswell again? In particular, in this time when we've got everything that's being thrown at us, as someone has already um, alluded to, encourage silence. How do we get the congregations as well as other clergy to start speaking up? And not only that, how do we keep them encouraged to be courageous in this moment?
I mean, I can offer just a general thought that so much of it is organizing, right? It's having the organizing infrastructure, and just think about like the role played by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Montgomery Improvement Association, all that provided such powerful infrastructure for all the organizing campaigns and movements during one of our greatest pro-democracy movement in American history, the Civil Rights Movement. So I think that organizing and starting with small things, starting with like community dialogues and potlucks to like meet people, have one-on-one conversations, build trust, tend to people's needs. So show up for people's needs where they're at. People are suffering. They're having healthcare cuts, SNAP cuts, immigrants being targeted. Just like showing up in solidarity as a starting point and listening to what the needs are, and then finding the next thing. But yeah, I think that just the showing up, the ritualized participation, as Reverend Jorge said, just being there kind of repeatedly as a presence, as a pastoral presence, and then the organizing power of like being able to organize congregations and participate in collective action.
I mean, that's the power of building community, right? In a society where individualism is has such a grasp on us, sometimes I feel. I think I already said this about keep repeating myself. Once you start building community, build relationships, and you start seeing people as friends and family, you will have the courage to keep showing up because that love is that strong there for people.
All right. We've got a question that might be sort of geared towards those in the ministerial professions here. In a government that is attacking so many areas of life and has taken away so much daily, how do we as pastors resist and respond without thinning ourselves? Any thoughts on that?
It's a
By
constant, it's a
by
constant
thinning
struggle.
yourself, do you mean like stretching yourself too thin? And are we talking self-care?
That's how I'm interpreting as stretching oneself too thin. One's got a lot of things going on as a pastor, and one's trying to figure out where to devote one's time and energy in relationship to these important movements and causes.
Brooks, all these preachers on this call, I'm expecting to hear something real good, and perhaps somebody will write about it because I think that might be a universal struggle when it comes down to clergy.
Jorge, you're about to say something, I think.
No, it's a constant struggle. I mean, especially if you are a minister perishing in church, right? And I mean, everyone's context is different, so it's hard to answer that question because we are all coming from different situations. But I know for many pastors, if you're part of a church and let's say not all your members want to be out on the streets, but you have to care for them, right? Because that's where you've been summoned to do. I mean, how to show up and be present for your own parish is the constant, I think, hard balance to do. And I wish I had that magic wand. But you just hope that your people support what you believe in, and that there's moments where we're just called to be out there, and that you just listen to your instincts and body, and know that it's okay to say no for a particular moment.
Thanks. All right, I think we have come to our final minute here. Michael, is there anything you want to do to put a bow on this gift of a webinar that we have received today from our three panelists? It has been terrific and enriching in so many different ways. Mike, what do you have to say for us?
Brooks, let me tell you, I just got tickled. It was funny how nobody really wanted to step up to answer about self-care, which is extremely telling of us as preachers and pastors. So if there's a word that I could leave in all seriousness, is that we do really take care of ourselves in this downtime while we've got time to rest, while we've got time to reflect. Let us seize those moments to make sure that we are fit for the fight. We've still got a whole lot of fight left ahead of us. As I said, this week alone, we were told that our concern for our affordability is a democratic hoax. So we know with that mentality, we still got a whole lot more fight left for those who are most vulnerable. And so let's make sure in this holiday season that we take care of ourselves. And then, in addition to, give to those things that really are impactful. I know this is our time of giving. A lot of us utilize this time to make contributions. Please, 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 again, give to those things, those organizations, those individuals that are really impactful. United Church of Christ is a great place to give. The People's Justice Council is a great place to give. There are others whose organizations are represented on this call who are great places to give. So rest. Please get your rest. But also in your giving season, please give to those things that are impactful, that are working for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. As we bring this to an end, I want to let people know about our upcoming webinars. This Saturday, we are going to have with us the Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr., who many of you know played such a key pivotal role in the launch of the environmental justice movement and many other movements as well. And so I always find it helpful to figure out what I'm doing by listening to those who have gone before me. And certainly we have that opportunity this Saturday. So feel free to join our national webinar, monthly webinar for the Climate Hope affiliates. That's this Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern. And then in January, Michael and I will be back. We're going to kick off the year with a climate action commissioning service where we are going to have the Reverend Jim Antal preach as we make sacred commitments to how we are going to act and align ourselves with God's will in 2026. And so join us for that as well. And lastly, let us give lots of thanks for our three panelists today who were outstanding. So grateful to each of you for joining us. You are tremendous. The work and the ministries that you all do is so vitally needed in the world today. We are grateful for each of you. Thank you so much. God bless everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you all. Peace and blessings.